Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's writing exercise. In this week's episode, we talked about sociological theories and methods for new students or people who are interested in knowing what sociology is all about. And just to give a brief summary of what we discussed, we highlighted the three major canons and the three major sociological theories that you would most likely be introduced to at the undergraduate level. We talked about functionalism, which really we talked about how society has various institutions, like the family, the educational system, the religious institutions, and the economic, which must all perform their individual functions to maintain stability and equilibrium of the society. Next, we have conflict theories, and they differ from functionalism in that they hold that there are fundamental differences of interests between social groups. So theories like Marxism and feminist theories are examples of conflict theories. And lastly, we have interactionism, which is concerned with action between individuals. It's also known as symbolic interactionism, and it begins from the assumption that these actions between people is meaningful to all those involved. We also discussed a very brief distinction between theories and methodology, especially in the context of writing a paper. And just to summarize, we said theories are a set of ideas that provide an explanation for human society, while methodology involves ways of producing and analyzing data so that theories can be tested, accepted, or rejected. So for today's writing exercise, I'm going to pick an example and try to relate it to the theories I have just discussed. So when we pick the educational system and we consider the roles of schools, for a functionalist theory, we would really be looking at ways that which schools socialize students, ways that values and norms are being impacted into students. And so things like what cultures the schools socialize students into. And if we pick the contributions of Emil Durkheim, which is a major functionalist theory, we would be looking at how he believes that education should be a vehicle to improve people's material condition, how he realizes that education is more likely to reproduce rather than change society. Because if you remember in the explanation of functionalism, we had said how the goal is really to maintain equilibrium and to keep things at status quo, so to maintain stability. But if we look at a conflict perspective, particularly Marxism, we would be thinking of how schools operate like institutions, like schools operate like corporations and are profit-driven. We would be looking at questions of class inequality and how that manifests along different levels of people that we have in schools. And lastly, if we pick symbolic interactionism, we would really just be looking at how people communicate, how actions are meaningful to people in an educational setting. So today's exercise, I want you to pick an aspect or a social problem and try to explain it using the three sociological perspectives we've discussed. So if you pick a problem like divorce in families or in modern families, what would be the functionalist perspective to understanding why people get divorced? What would be the conflict perspective? And lastly, what would be the symbolic interactionist perspective? And you could just write this down. So you can set a timer for 3 minutes and just briefly